Hello, guys and gals. Thank you for tuning in this week. On this week's episode of the Regenerating Nature podcast, we cover everything from the egg conspiracy that's hitting the nation right now or taking the nation by storm, all the way down to heated water holes for wildlife and using bedding areas to produce biomass for deer. The bedding areas for the deer, not the biomass for the deer, obviously, and everything in between, I guess. We talk a fair bit about chickens and how valuable they can be, and obviously talk about efficient land use and land management, and a variety of other things along the way. So this is a video podcast for those of you that are tuning in to the audio version, and there will be a handful of clips dubbed over just the face to face, or not face to face, the virtual recording of Taylor and I and what we discussed today. So if you're into the video side of things, check us out on YouTube. It's actually on the Untamed Ambition YouTube channel, but if you search the Regenerating Nature podcast, you will find it pretty easily. So thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoy. And again, if you get something out of the show, we'd appreciate it if you share it with a couple of people and help us spread the word, spread the message. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the Regenerating Nature podcast, where we discuss all things nature and how they apply to humans and human interactions, and how humans are slowly destroying all aspects of that while ruining their future and not even being aware of it. Is that too dark for an intro?
Well, I would like to preface it by saying I'm not as doom and gloom as Thomas. Thomas is in the doom and gloom phase of our environment. I'm past that stage now where I'm just focusing on like the positives, because there are some.
Well,
they definitely aren't as many as the negatives, but
you sound like my wife, where when I say stuff to her, she's like, why are you so critical, or why are you so negative? And I'm like, I don't do that intentionally, and I didn't say that to be intentionally negative or set the tone. I get paid to find problems, right? What are the problems? Yeah. What are the root causes of your, what are the obstacles standing in the way of you and your goal? So I don't know, maybe I'm just more aware of a lot of things. Certainly more aware of a lot of things these days than I was 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago.
I think it's when it's, I don't know. I was very doom and gloom for a while when I first started learning about this stuff and looking into it and researching it.
Well, I think that's a pretty natural tendency when you start to understand like how bad things really are.
Yeah. Yes, but I think it's also important we find, positives, and highlight positives that are happening, people that are changing, even if it's difficult at times.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I mean, there are a lot of positives, so I don't want to come off as like being all doom and gloom by any means. And that's what I often think about, is like, how do we, obviously that's where this podcast came from, but how do we just get more people to pay attention to other things, or just give it a chance, like shift your perspective for a minute, do some research and see things from this angle instead of getting hung up on how things are. And
yes.
It's very much a generational thing, right? I mean, and I get it, like no one wants to admit that they're wrong about anything, let alone something you've been doing, or the way you've been doing it for how long, your entire lifetime. So no, there's a lot there, but what's new with you?
Well, it's cold.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping this is our last. You'll learn this about me, Thomas. Almost every podcast I've ever done that is weekly based, I somehow like try to wedge in the weather, because I'm obsessed with the weather. I like always talk about it just inherently, because that's like what I think about as like what's new. Yeah, what's new? Well, god damn it, it's cold, but I will take this cold over the Christmas cold that we had by 100. Like, this is not bad. If we can just get through this, and then it looks like it's warmer next week, because I'm hunting for spring. Like I'm hunting for spring, tired of winter. I'm ready to go there. I'm ready to get the animals out. But the pigs are growing well, the chickens are laying well, and the beef look good. So I'm happy.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I I guess I find myself checking the weather all the time because usually 50% of my work days are outdoors. So I was outside yesterday and it was cold, but it wasn't that cold. You're right. I mean, when you're moving around, it's cold, but I honestly like those days. When I'm out consulting on a property and it's someone who's hired me to help them set up habitat for white-tailed deer specifically, but I use it as a means to improve all wildlife habitat. And since white-tailed deer are native species, then they tend to thrive when you have diverse native habitat. But I like it when it's cold like that, where they feel that dramatic temperature difference from one side of the hill to the other side of the hill, be it in the sun or in the wind versus out of the wind, in the sun versus the shade, or even on top of the hill compared to down in the bottom. And we ended up down this little hole. I mean, there's all these fingers, these ridge lines came out and met in this like bowl, and it was out of the wind, but it was significantly colder down there. And
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was cold yesterday, obviously, but it was, it's just interesting to use that as kind of a teaching or learning moment where you're like, okay, you start explaining thermals and how that thermal air moves to a lot of people. And a lot of people, they understand it, but they don't. And then when you get out there and you're like, okay, like, a day like today where it's kind of overcast and cool, those thermals are dropping almost all day. But when the sun comes out and warms up that air, then they're going to start pulling back up that valley, and you can't hunt here, you can't go this, you can't go there, you can't go here, all sorts of stuff. So the cold weather, I don't know, I like it. I would rather have this over intense heat, but that cold stretch around
Yeah.
Christmas was pretty brutal too.
That was terrible. Because I said the same thing. Like when it's 95 or 100, I would take this for sure over that. The Christmas stuff was like, that might be worse because everything's like breaking.
I grew up on a farm where you're never really prepared for anything because there's always so much to do that it's not like, oh, we're caught up with things today, so what can we do to get ahead of it before problems happen? And so I always think that the first cold snap, when you have all those problems, like, is it just because it's the first cold snap and you work out those kinks, or was it just truly that much colder that day? Because what was it, that stretch, like the 23rd through the 25th or something, was, I mean, they had
Oh, it was about a
warning.
week, I think.
Yeah, well, I think it was like 3 or 4 days
The bad stretch was like three
where
or
they
four
had
days.
like the advisories on, like travel advisories on and stuff over the holidays, and you know, and then it just got cold. But I I don't know, I got ahead of things when it got cold, but I waited until the last minute, just like a typical farmer would do. And I ended up running to, we were supposed to head across the state to spend some time with family over the holidays, and I ended up running to Farm and Fleet like the morning before we left and bought a bunch of pipe heating cable to put over the wellhead on my rental property, because it's I don't know the exact name of the system, but it's like a backfeed type system where it brings the water up to a pipe that's only a couple inches underground and then brings it back, or brings it into the house that way, instead of like pumping it directly into the pressure tank. So when we bought the house, the previous owner had like a styrofoam insulated cooler, like a fishing cooler you put minnows in or something. He had
Mm-hmm.
that over the top of this wellhead, and then he had a plastic garbage can over the top of that, and then he had a brick sitting on top of it. And it's like, oh, that's pretty aesthetically pleasing to have in the middle of your backyard. So I took it out right away, when I was cleaning up the place, because it was kind of a little bit neglected. And the thought never crossed my mind again until that day when I was walking outside and I was like, man, it is cold out here today, like for real cold, finally for real cold. And I can see that rental property from my house. And I looked down there and I like instantly I was like, oh no, like that well's gonna freeze up. And I text the tenant and I was like, are you guys there? Are you gonna be around this weekend? And he texted me back. He's like, no, actually, we're gone for 5 days. I'm like, well, that's worst case scenario if you have well issues where you don't have water running, right? And it
Yeah.
sits stagnant. So yeah, I went and bought some pipe heating cable and wrapped it around the wellhead, insulated, wrapped some insulation around that, and then buried the whole thing in snow. And it was good. We're good to go there. But it was fun because when I was in
Snow's a
Farmer
great
Fleet,
insulator.
oh yeah, it's fantastic. But when I was in Farmer Fleet buying that pipe heating cable, I had this other light bulb go off in my head because they had like a 6 foot section of it, and then they had a 30-foot section of it. I was like, what would a guy do with 30 feet of this? And then as I was leaving, when I got in my truck, I had just happened to notice I've got a stack of these earth ponds, these fiberglass pond liners that I put out on client properties for wildlife to use. Had a stack of them sitting by the shed and or on my trailer actually. And just like the thought crossed my mind, like, what if I heat one of those suckers up? Right. I mean, we talk about limited resources. You're not going to find a more limited resource than fresh, cold water that's not frozen, open water when it's negative 35 degrees outside. And it's not like animals
Well,
don't
the video you
drink.
posted, the video you posted of that buck, he did what all animals I think are doing majority of the time in the winter. Because remember, did you see how he like tested it and he's like got nervous? I don't know if
Yeah.
he ever did a drink, did he?
Yeah, he did. He actually
But then he comes back
he
and like
came
just
around the back. So he
leans
actually
down
looped
and licks
around.
a mouthful of snow up.
Yep. Yep. No, he
They consume a lot through snow.
you kind of cut a you told the audience my whole story.
I know.
No,
Sorry.
that's okay. Long story short, I taped a bunch of this pipe heating cable to the bottom of this 50-gallon earth pond, and at the that this was a couple weeks after that real cold spell, and actually where we are here in the Midwest and southwestern Wisconsin, it actually warmed up quite a bit in early January and rained
Yeah,
for a while.
January
So
was actually
yeah, so I was able to dig that thing in and put it in the ground in the middle of January. So I installed one of those in the middle of October on the hunting property and filled it, and the deer hit it within like 24 hours. And I had the biggest buck on the property on that water hole all fall long. In fact, the deer still check in there almost daily to see if there's water there. Like they paw at it and whatnot. But this one, I put a 100-foot extension cord length from my back deck into the woods behind my house, just like literally 10 feet behind our yard fence. The same yard that my kids are out playing in all the time, the same yard that my two yellow labs are out, peeing in, leaving all sorts of scent, running around, all sorts of stuff, right? And there's always deer around our house, because we're tucked back in the woods and there's pretty good bedding area right above us. But I just wanted to see how long it would take for them to find it, similar test as the October water hole, but then also, how sought after is this water source as a limited resource in the middle of the wintertime. And I haven't went through the whole trail camera card yet. I think within about 24 or 48 hours, a deer came up and drank out of it and checked it out. And then, they have periodically, but not a whole lot. But that buck was the first time I saw a deer drink out of it during the daytime. And the coolest thing was, we were watching a couple deer out the window, me and my kids, or me and my daughter, my 2-year-old daughter. And right now she's just absolutely fascinated with anything that she sees running around outside. And we're watching a handful of does, and I was videotaping. I'm trying to get some video on my phone, so it's nothing high quality by any means. But then all of a sudden I was like, oh, there's a buck. Oh, like there's a pretty nice buck, and he's walking right towards the water hole. So my first thought is I still have a valid buck tag in my pocket. The season doesn't close for 3 more days, and my bow is literally 25 feet away from me, hanging on the wall. with the rangefinder, my release, and everything that I need to tag this deer. But it was just one of those moments where, like, man, you could scramble and try to make this happen. Dogs are probably gonna get excited. Someone's gonna make some noise, and then I'm gonna slide the patio door open, and then everything's gonna go running and scare everything. Or I can just sit here and enjoy the moment and watch this deer and watch how he acts. And I'm glad I did, because my daughter loved it. And he was a little ruddy too. I mean, he was like bumping these does around, lip curling, chasing them all over. And I mean, we watched him for like probably a half hour. So it was really, really fun experience. And then he worked his way off. But yeah, he came in, he checked out that water hole from the top side and didn't drink. And then he backed up and came up from the bottom side and actually drank out of it. But for whatever reason, the trail camera didn't trigger when he came up from the bottom side. So I don't know.
Well, he did exactly, I think, what I don't know. I think they consume most of their water. Well,
from snow.
I shouldn't say that.
I think they generally get it from the vegetation, but
right. Yeah.
But when the vegetation is, desiccated or dormant, there's not a whole lot of moisture content to it. And that's why an open water source in freezing cold weather, if you're a hunter and you're hunting a water hole that you have in the woods, that it's way more attractive to those deer during November when everything else is frozen and dried out and brown than when when it's a little bit hot out, but everything's green and lush still. They get all their moisture content that way. But
they probably have a hard time finding forage that has good water content right now.
No, yeah, I'm sure. I mean, they haven't been hitting it hard by any means, but again, it's only been out there for like 10 days. So,
well, is there like a creek around you?
No, the closest running water by us it's probably close to 3/4 of a mile away. I mean, there's a lot of
they're just drinking snow like crazy.
Yeah,
people winter cattle without giving them water.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, and one day, it's pretty cold, and the main water that was filled that day was back in their shelter, and I went out. Sometimes I just stand with them and observe them, and they were all drinking or eating snow a lot. And then you look down on the ground, you could see where they've all been licking, because they were more willing to stay with their food out in the field than go back and get their water, because they'll go back like twice a day if it's a long ways away. And I think they drink like, they'll drink 100-gallon tank down. They'll drink probably about 80% of their water intake in one sitting, and then they go back out, and that last day they're like giraffes.
Yeah, no, I'd believe it. I mean,
or camels. I mean, that's what camels do.
Camels,
that's why they're
they can stock up on it.
But there's people that, there's like Gabe Brown will winter them in cover crop fields, bale graze. Well, he supposedly now he literally sends them out into a cover crop field with nothing.
Lets them dig. I mean,
well, it's,
capable of doing
10 to 15 foot tall sorghums in there. So it's not like it's hidden. They're in a mountain of food
and cover. So they're getting some protection from the wind, not a ton, but a little bit.
Well, I've thought about doing that, where you do that, you have a field like that, and then you strip graze it into the north. So they have a standing forage cover, just along the north side, and then they eat their way into it. You just take a line down every week.
Yeah. No,
I'm doing something similar with it with bales, where I line bales up and I stick the hot fence into the bales, where I stick like a post into the bales and then run the hot fence in front of it, but then line those bales up to be a windbreak, and they use it.
Yeah, makes sense. They can adapt. I mean, even people are pretty adaptable. We just get too comfortable and too set in our ways to try anything or push through that discomfort to adapt. But like my chickens, it's cold. It's like -35 outside today with the wind chill, and I don't heat my coop.
That would be absolutely insanity. Those things are freaks. They're meant to live. They're meant to.
They can handle it all.
Are you gonna say, are they outside at all during days like this?
usually they don't go outside on days like this.
Yeah,
And actually, I've got an automatic coop door that,
same.
well, yours is probably like a legit automatic coop door. Mine is a old
Wait, homemade,
retractable.
right?
Yeah, it's a retractable car antenna that I hot wired to a timer. Eh, But for whatever reason, I don't know if it's the timer or the power supply or what it is, but for whatever reason, when it gets like about 10 below, the door won't open, which works out perfectly okay because usually they don't go out of the coop anyway. So then it's just less, less area for cold air to come into the coop. But no, they it was also funny the snow eating thing that you mentioned with the cattle, because I've heard people talk about, chickens, you have to have water, they won't eat snow. I'd certainly give them fresh water all the time, but I see them eat snow all the time. In fact,
I know people that don't.
I believe it. I mean, I think they'd be
I
okay.
do because I feel bad, but I don't think you'd have to.
Yeah, well, when they're in the coop all day, then I definitely give them water, and it's not that big of a deal either. But no, my chickens don't really want to leave the coop right now anyways, because the other day a hawk killed one of them.
Oh
and
yeah.
and it's like all of a sudden they catch on real fast. We live in the woods essentially, right? Like we're tucked up in the edge of the woods, got some open areas. As you go down the hill from our house, the valley kind of opens up, but we're tucked in the edge of the woods. And we deal with foxes and hawks and owls. We've got both gray and red foxes, coyotes. Obviously, raccoons are probably the worst enemy for raising chickens. I mean, those things can get into anything. They're super tough and they can clean house in a hurry. Uh, we've got bobcats running around here, and the chickens pretty much free range all the time in the summer, but in the wintertime, they're in the chicken run because there's obviously nothing for them out there to forage on or scratch up. But I don't have a cover on my chicken run because I live in the woods, and if I had a cover on there, there'd be branches falling on it, breaking it, or leaves getting piled up on the netting or whatever it might be. I'd just be dealing with it all the time. So I just leave the cover off and never have problems until this time of year. And last year, same, almost exact same time frame. I think it was like the first week of February, and the hawk killed one of the chickens. But we only have two of those Polish chickens with the mop tops on them. So, I mean, when you're dealing with a potential aerial threat and you have something on your head that blocks your view above you, you're going to die. And I also had another one get attacked later, but it got away. And then I noticed my rooster was like significantly more protective and aware. Like every time a bird, crow sized or bigger, be a turkey vulture a long ways away. I mean, most of the time I wouldn't even see him, and that rooster would turn his head to the sky, and he'd just like make this roaring sound like a little mini T-Rex. And
That's
all of a sudden,
awesome.
a couple seconds later, you'd see a bald eagle soar over, or turkey vulture soar over or something. But yeah, this hawk, it was, I saw something, or I went outside, and I saw a movement underneath the coop because my coop's set up where the chickens can go under the coop for protection and get out of the elements. And then the sun shines in that south side of the coop, and they, so it's dry. They dust under there all the time. They spend a lot of time under there, obviously, if it's inclement weather, like rainy days or anything. But I saw this commotion under the coop, and like right away, something didn't seem right because the chickens don't flop around like that. And when I got over there, here's this big red tail hawk stuck underneath the coop and can't figure out how to get out from underneath it. And I got him out. Well, first I went and got the kids and my wife, because when you can get 3 feet away from a dangerous aerial killing machine and see its talons and everything up close, I mean, that's an experience you should take advantage of. So I got everyone out there to check it out, and everyone thought it was cool. And then I kind of just like got around the side of the coop enough to scare him or encourage him to go out the back side of it where he came in, and got him out of there. But I have to take a couple screws out to take the front panels off of that area underneath the coop. So I just left the dead chicken under there for the time being. And well, the hawk flew out, and then he only like flew to the first tree and landed, and then he like sat there for a little bit, and then he like flew to another tree and landed. I was like, man, is he hurt? Like, did he ding himself up a little bit? So I was a little bit worried there because I didn't want to see him actually get hurt. I'm saying him, but I don't know if it was a male or female hawk, so I apologize for that. But anyways, eventually he flew off, and I I went in the house, took the kids in the house, and like literally took my boots off, was doing a couple things. I look out the window and I see movement underneath the coop again. And I go back out there, and that hawk was already under there. Within 10 minutes or so, he was back underneath that coop eating that dead chicken that he had killed. So obviously tells you that they're a little bit hungry right now. And he was really that risk versus reward. He was willing to come back that soon. I mean, we were out there with both dogs and everything, and the dogs were very interested in what was going on, sniffing him and stuff. So it was interesting, but I got him out again. And the second time I actually had to take a stick and like push it through the netting and like push him to get him to turn and go out the back. Cause when he get close, he just like freeze up and like fall onto his back with his wings expand. Like, oh, what am I going to do? Probably like a defensive mover. I guess, if I would have approached him, he probably would have grabbed me with his claws or something, right? And his talons. But I wasn't going to try that. I should have. Now that I think about it, I should have
No,
grabbed
that would
well.
not be fun.
I should have grabbed a
Or
welding
yeah, you
glove.
got a glove.
Yeah. But even a welding glove, man, I bet you they can go right through a welding glove if you're not careful. But anyway, I got him out, and I took the chicken out and basically donated it to him. That's what I did last year. Then he left him alone. But we'll see how it goes. I posted a couple clips on social media of it, and of course you have exactly what I would expect from the human population, where half the people are like, "Oh, that's such a gorgeous animal, so such a cool experience, so beautiful." And then the other half are like, "I would kill him, kill it. There's enough hawks, kill it." I'm like, man, if I go and kill that hawk, and then next spring my fruit trees are girdled by a rodent, or I've got mice problems in my house, I'm like, I contributed to that factor by removing the predator that was responsible for keeping those problems in check. And it would be different if it was like a habitual thing where this hawk's killing chickens left and right. But a chicken here or there, not a big deal. I'll donate that to nature any day of the week, especially for the opportunity to get that close to one of those hawks and just kind of see them up front. It's pretty cool. So, but anyway, yeah, my chickens don't go outside much right now. So I feed them in the coop, and that's really all I do when it's super cold out. I've got a self feeder outside, like a 50-gallon barrel that I dump feed in that feeds into a pipe, and they can just feed out it whenever they want. And it's sweet because then if I'm gone on like a hunting trip or gone for a work trip or whatever it might be, I just dump 2-3 bags of feed in there and we're good. I mean, I could fill it up like once every other month if I wanted to. But then my wife, no one else has to be responsible. They just go out and collect the eggs and water the chickens every other day or so. But now when it's really cold, I feed them in the coop, and I feed them like right at dark. So right before it gets the coldest part of the day, I feed them, and that way they've got full bellies and they can metabolize all night, and they generate a lot more heat. And that's essentially the same reason that eagle or that hawk killed that chicken. These wild animals, they have to eat to heat, right? If they're not
Yes.
consuming
And
food
drink.
and drink, if they're not consuming food, they don't metabolize. I mean, I feel it myself a lot of days where like I'll have a long day. I don't eat a ton during the day, snack here or there, especially because I'm on the move. And if I have like on a few of these days in a row where I start to get tired and then the day goes on, I'm like, man, I'm really dragging right now, and I just feel colder than usual. Like, well, I haven't eaten anything most of the day, and I haven't drank enough water. So I totally see where they're coming from. But the difference is I have layers that I can put on, and I have a nice, comfortable home that I can seek refuge in, where they just like hunker down. I'm watching these deer out my window all the time, bedded down when that wind's just whipping outside, and they're just curled up in a ball. You got 3 or 4 does faced opposite directions, and that's how they live. And they're a lot tougher than us. But how are the cattle? I mean, they obviously, they're out there all the time. So as the temps drop, same with the chickens. Like as the temps drop, they are adapted to it. And
Well, that goes back to why everything breaks. I think the first time it gets cold, because I think everything takes a minute to get used to it. 100% cattle are the best example of this, because the chickens you don't really notice as much. At least I don't. They take a moment to like acclimate. So they were like, I think they're like right now handling it very well. No problems. I think the first cold snap, even in December, they weren't exactly used to it yet. They seem to stay in the shelter a lot more. Today, they've been out just grazing on or just eating hay bales out in the wide open pretty much all day because the wind is not that bad. And then they'll always go in at night. But I would say, as far as consumption purposes, I mean, cattle might consume almost 50% more water on days like today. And I would venture to say they're probably 25% more food intake. The pigs went through almost 15 pounds more of food yesterday than they have been.
I believe it.
And for sure, I notice chickens, I think, eat, I would say, about 20% more food, and then they seem to drink more water too. Cattle for sure are drinking almost double in a day like today than what they do on other days. And obviously, when it's a super perfect day, which I would say 30 to 60 degrees for cattle, and they're grazing, they would hardly consume any water. They would just get most of it out of the ground.
Yeah, just like a deer, just like
Yes.
everything else. Yeah. What's
But like right now, they consume more water on a day like today than they would on the hottest day in the summer.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, again, it's a limited resource for sure. In fact, this
And they're eating dry hay.
Oh yeah, that adds to it too. But I was on this client property yesterday, and beautiful property, southwestern Wisconsin, hill country, and he's got a little cabin built there. He's retirement age now, and he's got kids and grandkids and whatnot. So, one of the big things that I'm always trying to do, on top of creating the best hunting situation for these guys that hire me for that, is put together a plan that is, aesthetically pleasing on the wildlife side and everything, but also beneficial to the property, to the health of the land, and to the family, whether it's another potential income stream or food security is the biggest thing. That's what I'm always trying to look for. So like this guy, we've got a food plot area. Like there's no reason you can't turn half this into orchards or strips of orchards in here to break up this big plot area. And now you come out here and pick all this fruit and whatnot for your family, and then leave the rest for the deer once season's here, all sorts of stuff like that. But I was
Well, and
actually
I'll
so
say from a
intrigued.
real estate perspective, I
That
think
adds a
there's
lot of
wiggle
value.
room. Yes. Just little things like that. Like I always tell people, picture whether or not a person could get something from this. Like, could someone sit here and have a picnic? Could someone sit here and be like, this would be a great place for us to take a picture? I think there's about $1,000 an acre wiggle room on if your property is aesthetically pleasing and nicely set up versus just a wide open bare cornfield. Like $1,000 an
Well,
acre is a lot, and
yeah,
I'm not kidding. I mean, we're talking that's about a 15 to 20% increase in the value of the property.
yeah. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I mean, it's like the curb appeal concept when you're selling just a home, but then you amplify that across the whole
It's the
property.
exact same thing.
But the thing,
It's the oldest lesson in the book for real estate purchasing and investing is the
well, and you
best
think
thing.
about it, you think about the aesthetics of that. It's not like it's not as short term as what curb appeal could be. Like, I could buy a house and I can invest $20,000 into it and replace the siding on it and some trim work, and it's gonna, and some minor landscaping, mow the yard, clean it up, and it's gonna completely change how that house looks from the curb, right? But you can't do that with a property, not that short of timeline. Over time, you can invest all that stuff into it, and it
Well,
develops, right?
I think there's short term things you can do really quickly in a day, and then I think there's obviously the long term things.
Yes, yeah. Well, yeah,
I
you
mean,
have the same.
what I was saying. It's the oldest lesson in real estate investment. If you are investing in real estate, the number one way for you to make your money back really well and more quickly is value adding. So if you add value to something, a property in any way, shape, or form, with vacant land and stuff like that, it's perceived differently than if you were to put siding on a house. But it's the exact same thing. People want to freely be able to move around the property. Like one of the biggest things, add a perimeter access lane around your fence lines. I mean, that is worth the investment of bringing someone in to do that.
Yeah,
Just so you can access around the whole perimeter. If we have a property like that for showings, that's night and day difference. Roads being cleared, mowing certain places, taking out invasives. those things are very quickly you can change the property, and then timing it obviously
Yeah.
well. Like if for hunting property, food plots, if they're in place and they look nice, obviously that'd be a great time to list
Oh yeah.
or at least get pictures.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, so to your point, yeah, you can make a lot of rapid changes. My mindset was more thinking of like, how can you develop that property more, I guess, right? Like planting a tree, right? You can't just put a tree in the ground and expect it to be productive and have all the value it has, or even look remotely the same as a tree that's 10 or 20 or 50 or, hundreds of years old. And that's a big thing that I try to get these guys to understand. And most of them do. You start talking, almost, or I'd say probably 50 to 60% of my clients call me before they log, and the other percentage call me after they log, and sometimes I'm the one that's telling them they need to log. Sometimes they already have a logger lined up, all this stuff. This situation, this property's under an MFL plan and it was due for a contract cut, but it, he had walked it with a logger and a forester, and basically the logger told him there wasn't enough timber value in there for his time unless they took, you know, excessive amounts of other things out at the same time. And by that, I mean, taking timber that's smaller than what they would normally take in some of these areas.
Yeah.
And, basically what I told him is like, you shouldn't, I wouldn't even take the big oaks to begin with. They're few and far between on the property anyways. So, what's the value of that oak at the mill versus the value of it to the wildlife and to this property long term? Like, man, those trees will live for 500 to 1,000 years if you let them.
Well, it's a whole ecosystem itself.
Correct. And that's what I explain. And that's why I really enjoy that time with those clients, because by the end of the day, they have a whole new perspective and really start to understand things. And
But you listen to a couple of whitetail habitat people. I mean, the people who are talking about tornadoing your property, they would say cut it because it's
oh
it's
yeah,
not probably it's probably not overly, like if you were to weigh it whether or not there should be sunlight to the ground there versus being there for deer purposes only. I could definitely hear that argument, but can you imagine the ecosystem that lives in that thing?
oh, it's ridiculous.
Well, I will say this, and this is a pitch for your service, is literally if anyone's listening that wants to be somewhat of a land investor, the easiest investment way to flip a property, I think, is buy it in, well, right around now. Go through the season, install food plots, have Thomas write a plan, install the food plots, plant trees, hunt it for a year, get proof from trail cam pictures, take the photos and videos from hunting season, and then list it in 1 year from now or whatever, January 1st. Because the hunting crowd is completely silent and quiet for buying land in the 3 months that you want to enjoy it the most. And then they're super hyper into it right now. You're not using it, but you got all the pictures and all the stuff you need. That's a quick way to make a buck. You sell that property, you 1031 it to next property, you do that 3 times, you could have a property free and clear.
A big property if you want it. No, that's a good point. But no, what I was gonna say was that oaks, the oak species in general, are host plants for like 534. I had to look it up because I knew it was 500 and something. 534 species of Lepidoptera. So moths and butterflies. So essentially, those moths and butterflies lay their eggs. They, obviously hatch, turn into caterpillars. 534 species of moths and butterflies utilize oak trees as a host plant. So when we lose our oak trees, if you remove those oak trees from the ecosystem, or like you said, it is in and of itself a whole ecosystem. But when we remove those from our forest ecosystems, we lose all those moths and butterflies. We lose all that food, those caterpillars, for all the birds that are nesting. They need those caterpillars to feed their chicks when their chicks are hatching and trying to grow fast enough to be able to fly south, or whatever, be ready for the winter. They need those caterpillars. So it's a whole collapse of a system when you remove that foundation, which is that tree, that oak tree. So what I was explaining to this client, which I explained to every client, is, it's different if you have like a crowded area of a bunch of oaks, then you want to pull some of those oaks out so you can
Yeah.
release the potential of some of the other oaks. But when you only have, oaks sporadically growing throughout your property because they've already been logged. And it's almost impossible to get decent oak regeneration the way people have been managing, because there's too many deer. The carrying capacity of all these properties is pushed way far beyond what it should be. There's too many deer, so they browse them right down. No one is utilizing fire. And that those are the two main contributing factors, I think, to the lack of oak regeneration. And then on top of that, you've got oak wilt that's just burning through the whole country. So I think people should be very hesitant to cut down those trees, especially the big ones. There are going to be certain areas where you can do it, but man, if you get back in some of those bedding areas, say you're trying to create a 1 or 2 acre bedding area, like there's nothing better to have in a bedding area than a handful of big oak trees, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I try and get them to understand. They do, and the problem is that there's a lot of these loggers out here. I just saw a couple posts on social media this morning too, but there's a lot of loggers that don't know what they're doing as far as cutting trees. They know the size of the tree, they know potential value of a tree. They don't know the true value of that tree on the landscape and the value of that tree in the ecosystem. And I'm not saying all of them, because there are some very responsible and some very good loggers out there, but it's just like any other industry, any other demographic. There's good ones and there's bad ones. And when you only deal with a logger once in your lifetime or twice in your lifetime, aside from these guys that are flipping properties or something along those lines, but the average person that owns land is not going to deal with a logger very, very frequently. So they pick some guy, or they know some guy that knows some guy, and he calls them, and it becomes a thing. So having someone like myself in there is a big deal. And you look at the cost, like what are my expenses? The cost of a walnut tree or two, right? It's like, but to have someone come in and give you another perspective on the value of your land and how to put together, or helps you put together a plan to manage it long term, and then figure out ways to make money off of it. But more importantly, I mean, the money goes hand in hand with this, but to keep that land in your name, essentially, right? If that land's paying for itself, it's no longer a potential liability on your portfolio, right? Now it's an asset. It is anyways, but it's the big thing that I'm looking at with a lot of these properties now, above and beyond just the ecosystems, is the food security side of things. And it all goes hand in hand, right? Because if you have healthy native habitat, you can get away with a lot more outside of the woods, planting fruit trees and whatnot. You're going to have a lot less stress on those trees, and you're also going to have a lot more beneficial insects, a lot more beneficial birds in those orchard areas. But just it all works as a big system. And these guys, once they have that perspective and they start to understand that, you can just see their eyes light up, and instantly it goes from I want to kill a big buck to I'm really excited to pass this property on to my kids and my grandkids, not just for the hunting aspect, but because I never really realized that you could do these things. But now that you say it, it makes so much sense. And why can't you do those things? It's like this food plot orchard example. It's like, if I'm going to break up this large food plot area with edges, I'll do some native grasses in some areas. I try to have a diversity of cover and, prairie and whatnot if you have the space. But screening, especially, the native grasses, switchgrass and whatnot, works well for that. But if I'm just going to break up this food plot rather than just putting in rows of switchgrass in there that aren't really that beneficial, I'm going to break it up with more edge habitat, because that edge habitat's the most productive habitat on the whole property. And if I can make that edge habitat at its, operate at its highest possible output, production type potential, then it has even more value. So this guy is going to end up with a killer food plot that's super attractive to deer, that has a load of different diverse food sources on it and around it. And then he's also going to have, a month to a month and a half to be able to pick fruit out of that orchard before season. And he's got this little cabin, a newer cabin they just built. It's like his own little getaway. He's retired now, so he can just kind of roll in there whenever he wants. And that's what I was explaining to him. I was like, man, you could come up here for a couple of weeks throughout the fall and hunt deer and pick and preserve apples and do all these things throughout the day. And then that's what I was like, hey, you should put a heated water hole right outside the window here. Like, everything lays out perfect where these deer are already cutting the lower side of this cabin. He's like, yeah, when I had this cabin built, he's got like a 3-season porch on the front. And he's like, I made sure that there was a couple panels on there that I could pull off in case I wanted to hunt out of here when I was older. I was like, yeah, I mean, why not take advantage of that? It's make it as fun and as exciting as you could possibly make it, even if you don't hunt out of that. Like for me to not shoot that buck out my back window or my back patio door, like it's still very, very rewarding. And what did it cost me? A couple $100 for that pond and a little bit of time to put that in. So
Yeah.
it's, all those things come into play. But again, it just goes above and beyond, like going in and cutting trees and opening up the canopy and planting soybeans for deer. There's so much more to it, which actually brings up another thought that I had that I was discussing with this client. The big issue ultimately with whitetail habitat and how a lot of these guys come in, you refer to it as like the tornado, or have a tornado come through, which, would be a very natural disturbance that would create or promote early successional growth, that early regeneration. And that's what whitetail deer really thrive on. But obviously you don't need your entire property to be covered in that.
No,
And
I mean, I think it's a perfect thing to do in pockets.
yeah, no, absolutely.
But then there
Absolutely.
needs to be, but the thing is, there needs to be obvious ways to navigate the property still. Because then there's some
Correct.
people that just do it for 40 acres and then you can't even walk, you can't get around.
Well, here's the issue with that in general, right? So it's pretty easy, relatively speaking, to go into a timber stand and open up a pocket, essentially create a clear cut. The problem that most people run into is the long-term management of that clear cut, right? If you just go in and cut a bunch of trees down, and this is par for the course with most people that follow the hinge cutting model that a lot of these guys push. And this client actually was one of those people. He had a lot of hinge cutting areas. Like the property has like 5 lobes on the ridge line that come out. They're all nice deep bedding areas. I mean, from the tip of these fingers to the field where those deer are going to end up feeding ultimately at night, it is a few hundred yards, some of them even deeper than that. So it laid out really nicely. But he had probably a half to quarter acre openings hinge cut at the end of all of those lobes, and the deer just weren't using them, plain and simple. But there's a couple critical mistakes that he made there, and it's no fault of his. It's just that he heard about hinge cutting, learned about hinge cutting, and went after it, and didn't really get truly thorough information on what he was doing, because obviously a very intelligent individual. But the big thing was he didn't cut a big enough area in general. So he had a couple areas cut, but you can open up an area, but if you're not actually opening up an area to get sunlight into that open area, then you're not going to get a whole lot going on, right? So like he cut a couple that were on more of the north side of the hill than anything, so they're already limited to sun exposure on that side, and so they just didn't really regenerate, and pretty much all the hinge cuts were dead. A lot of them were ironwood anyways, so it's no harm, no foul there. But then the second critical mistake he made was he just made a mess, and the deer couldn't move through that bedding area in general. If they can't get in and get out of there without getting caught up in it, they're not going to spend much time in there. They might pick around and browse from time to time during the day, but they're definitely not going to get tangled up in it. So that was a big thing. But the issue is the long-term management, so even if he went in there and flush cut everything, which would be more ideal, flush cutting those hardwoods so that you can manage them, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, it's going to start to lose its value. And then what do you do, right? So you either have to run fire through there at the right consistency with the right timing, and hope that, before those stems get too big, you can encourage enough native growth that you have enough fuel there to actually carry a hot fire and top kill those seedlings or those saplings to set them back again, or you have to go back in and cut it again, right? So one of the things that I'm always trying to do is trying to figure out, like, how can we get the management of this property to pay for itself at the end of the day? If these guys buy a recreational property, that's one thing, because that's in their budget. But then when you start talking about, actually managing a property so you can get it back to a level where it produces whatever your goal is for production, then you're going to have inputs, time, money, whatever it may be. And that's where a lot of people hit that wall. And that's why, the vast majority of recreational properties are pretty much unmanaged, and don't come at me with this management crap when you're planting soybeans or corn in your food plot and you've got 3 rows of switchgrass around the outside of it. Like, that's not property land management by any means, right? I see these guys posting pictures online all the time or videos online, and in the background I can see that their entire woodlot's just loaded with honeysuckle or something. Like, if you can trade out those invasive shrubs for native shrubs, the value of that property for the wildlife just went up exponentially. So that's more land management, right? But anyways, what I was getting at there was with those bedding
And the
areas.
value of the value of the property should be up.
Yes.
As long as
Yeah.
as long as you have agents, realtors that understand it,
And some guys
which there
do.
isn't very many.
No, there's not very many, but I do hear some of these guys talking about, some of these realtors talking about avoiding properties that have a lot of invasives in general because they are, more of a pain. But honestly, I have never been on a property that doesn't have invasives on it. I've yet
Yeah.
to be on a property that doesn't have invasives. And that's what I get these guys to understand, is that you
Well,
have
that'd be
to.
someone that doesn't need you.
Well, no, but I'm saying most of them they don't even know they have invasives. Like this property
Well,
I was
yeah, I know
on.
that. I know that. If you truly went on a property that was like beautiful, like non-invasives, they probably aren't hiring you.
No, well, they may or they may not, because like this guy, and actually the last probably 2 or 3 properties I've been on have had very, very few invasives. Like we're
Yeah.
walking through the woods and I find a multiflora rose that's a foot tall or something, a little bit different than finding, an entire hedgerow of invasives or nasty stuff. This guy was aware of a couple of things he had because he had just walked it with a forester, a month or 2 prior. So he was like, yeah, he told me that I've got autumn olive and honeysuckle on the property. Well, then we're walking around and found that, along with a couple buckthorn, a couple Japanese barberry, and a lot of multiflora rose and a couple pockets, but nothing crazy. And but it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you have to manage your property for those invasives one way, shape, or form. And really, proper management covers all those bases, right? So instead of thinking like, how do I get rid of these invasives because they're just going to come right back? Initially, if you're overrun, then you might have to do some cutting or get like you did, you got a forestry mulcher or fecon head on a skid steer in there, right? And ground all that buckthorn up.
Yeah,
But you still have
I
to
hope it works.
yeah, well, that's the thing, is you still have to have a plan to go forward, because
Well,
even
those
if
areas,
you
cattle are going to graze them.
well, that's the best thing you can do, at least short term. But the reality is that there's 10 plus years of seeds in the seed bank from those invasives that are viable for, they don't even know how long. Buckthorn can sit in the soil for, they think, probably 20 or 30 years. They minimum. So you have to manage it. At the end of the day, you have to manage it. And the best way to do that is either cattle or fire, right? The most cost effective ways. But when you're trying to promote early successional growth, specifically in like a hardwood stand with that hardwood regeneration for those thick, dense, high stem count bedding areas, there's a lot more management there than people think, right? Like, and I don't think a lot of people have even thought of that, because most of these guys that have gotten really big into the whitetail habitat side of things haven't done it long enough to really understand the long-term management aspect of these things, right?
So what do you recommend people do with it?
Well, that's the thing, is there's no silver bullet, right? If you manage well with fire, and this is the problem I think a lot of people have with their properties with habitat improvements in general, is they either go at it too small or they don't commit to it, right? So they do a couple things and they don't see the rapid changes that they want, and they kind of fall back. Or they do they plant a handful of trees and shrubs, but not enough. And then, they never plant enough where they can even untube them or uncage them, because the deer just mow them right to the ground because it's a limited resource. Or they just, most of that goes hand in hand with the fact that there's just not a lot of browse on the property to begin with, because it needs to be logged. But they're also overrun with invasives. So if they log, then all those invasives are going to be released. And or like again, the hinge cutting, like the hinge cut too small of an area, so they don't actually let enough sunlight in, and they're just not doing enough at any given time. And that's a big thing, first and foremost, to get it established, because if it's half established, then you can't really half manage a half established type of setting, if that makes sense, right? Fire is about the best thing you can do. But if you don't get enough sunlight into these bedding areas initially to get enough growth, and you're not managing the invasives, then you're not going to get enough of the native forbs and grasses and whatnot growing in amongst the hardwood regeneration to carry fire through there. And it takes a fairly hot fire to top kill a lot of these stump sprouts 3-4 years down the road when they're an inch or two in diameter, or else you have to go back in there and cut them all down again. And there's only enough time to do that. So one of the big things that I try to do is promote more shrub planting, because the shrubs, you could get those in a state once they're mature and established where you can mow them off or burn them off every single year, and they're going to come back, the native shrubs. But that's the beauty of a native shrub versus an invasive shrub, is if you get it established and you burn it off, it can come back and produce seeds or berries usually, in the first year or so, where a lot of your invasives, once you take the top off of them, it takes them significantly longer to mature to the point where they're producing the berries and spreading them all over. So that's why fire is one of the best things that you can do. If you reset everything to a same level, and then you run fire through there with enough consistency to keep those invasives at bay, and you keep a lot of other plants at bay that would normally choke out things like your oaks, right? So you get more oaks in there. That's the best way to encourage that oak regeneration. But no, one of the things that I came across last weekend, I was just kind of doing some digging. Saw an article about biofuels and biomass. Actually, I think it might have been sparked somewhat from our conversation last week about Bill Gates and how he's making up for his carbon footprint by investing in eco-friendly fuel options and biomass. But I was just looking at biomass stuff, and I came across this article about using aspen or poplar regeneration to produce biomass or biofuels from biomass. And I was just like, ding, like, man, how many areas do you know of that have a ridge top or a point that is currently populated with aspen or poplar, right? And those trees,
and it's such a quick grower. If that were the case, you can plant them anywhere.
correct.
And
But
they're a weed.
the problem is, and I dug into this, and there's a lot of promise to it, actually. But the current way that they're doing this is the current way they do everything on an industrial level. So they are taking fields and they're planting rows and rows and rows of hybrid poplar, and then they
Oh,
harvest
that
them
makes sense. I've seen those.
at 3 years of age. They go through and mow them down. It makes sense, but it doesn't make sense to me, because again, it's like,
Well, it's a monocrop.
but yeah, well, that's one problem. That's a big problem right out of the gate. But the bigger thing is, and I don't know, because I haven't done this to this level, but I do know that when you cut those trees, if they're a certain size, 6 to 8 inches in diameter, they have a very shallow root system. They're actually I think they're referred to as like a colonial species, where they share, a lot of times they share root systems. And so, but they're all very shallow, and that's how they regenerate, is off the root system. So your poplars, your aspen, your cottonwood, they're all in the same family. And when you cut them off, instead of stump sprouting, they send up all these suckers off the roots. And that's, you can get, if you cut a stand of poplar or aspen, you can get 7 to 10,000 stems per acre in the first few months, right? They come back with a lot of vigor. They put all that energy in those stump or those root suckers. So my thought was like, first and foremost, like, hey, could a guy plant a bedding area of poplar or aspen and then go in there and harvest it for biomass every few years, so that it's regenerating and staying at that early succession where it's good browse factor. So obviously you're not going to have the same level of production that you would in a field that's controlled, where you're not letting animals in there. You want to contribute to that. So maybe you're harvesting less frequently, But could you do that first and foremost, right? Is that a potential option? And then secondly, if you, so say I find a property that has a point on it right now, it's populated with aspen that's already mature. So there's a perfect situation there. Hey, we just go in there and we clear cut this whole point, and it's all going to regenerate automatically off the native stand of aspen. And then we come back in a few years later and we harvested it again for the biomass side. And I don't know the limitations on the size of the trees that they can utilize for biomass. I think the bigger ones, they utilize the top portion of the tree and then they use the bottom portion for pulpwood or whatever it might be. But could you do that, but leave a handful of those trees to mature, and you set it up in a cycle where you're leaving just enough to mature and create this root system. And then every, X number of years, you cut the big trees and they regenerate and just keep the cycle going. So you're not replanting, and you can harvest more frequently and keep that area set in that early generation stage to provide food and cover for those deer. So I went down a rabbit hole with that, and I think it's very feasible. I think the biggest thing is the logistics side of it, as far as getting the biomass to this handful of companies that are actually utilizing it. But this kind of comes back to that holistic approach of managing land in general, right? It's like you shouldn't be looking at it just to manage it for whitetails. You should be looking at it like, how are you managing it to where it's benefiting the animals on the land, it's improving the land, but it's also financially stable, and it also is adding value to the community, the local ecosystems, all this stuff, right? More of a holistic approach where you're looking at all aspects of that land and how it fits into the bigger picture. So it's like, hey, if you can get enough people in enough areas to get on this program, which I'm starting, which I'm referring to as, you ready for this? Biomass bedding areas. And then you just set up a time where like all these bedding areas are harvested on a rotation during a certain time of the year, and load up some rail cars and ship them by train to these biomass facilities. And I mean, you're not getting rich off this by any means, but it would cover your costs of the management side, so you could keep your bedding areas in a state of perpetual early succession, and you're benefiting the system.
I mean, do you have a logger? Because that's my biggest issue, and loggers are hard to come by. Because that would be the biggest thing. Because that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I don't think a logger would. Well, I mean, they could certainly do it, but I think most of these stems that are harvested are almost too small. I talked to a couple loggers about this to find out the minimum size that their processing head could, those feller cutters.
Oh, like the excavator one?
Yeah, the cutter feller heads or whatever they call them. Like the smallest size that they could process on there. And they said 4 inches was probably the smallest that could go. So I don't know, again, where's that fine line? This is in motion. Like I set this in motion. I've got some feelers out, got some communication going between some of these companies. I'm trying to get more information on all this stuff to get it to move. I mean, I think there's a big promise there, but again, it's like, hey, how can we do that? And also I'd rather see more, bedding areas and habitat like that created for animals that are harvested versus just these like giant switchgrass fields with giant miscanthus structures planted in them for bedding areas. It's like wildlife desert, just creates great cover for those deer to disappear, and that's about it. But so again,
for only a couple months out of the year.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great idea.
Well,
I think that everybody's property needs to be broken down in like 10 spots, and how you want to manage it. How do you want to manage the woods, which then requires a good logger to actually get the financial return from it. Fields, buildings, all those things. But it comes down to logistical side of stuff always, that's where you can be the landowner's friend.
Well, that's exactly it, and that's exactly it. It all comes down to logistics. I mean, how can a company like UPS ship a package across the country for $12 or $15, right? I can't put that box in my truck and drive across the country for $12 or $15, but they can do it with some planning and the logistics, obviously, that, you're lining up all these things to happen at one time. And that's why it's not a feasible thing for one or two guys to do, but if we get more guys to work together and think about the bigger picture, and then we just say, hey, this time of year, or get everyone on a similar plan or similar rotation where you're pulling these at X amount per property per year in an
So
area
do you want to know how this gets accomplished?
by doing it.
Well, sure, but
Oh.
this is why co-ops are so popular with farmers and landowners.
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
People develop co-ops, and then you share resources and logistical things.
Well, that's where I'm
Because the same,
going. I'm on that path.
yeah,
I'm going to start a co-op.
yeah. Because I mean, we're talking about the same exact thing. Why people don't have cattle that manage their land too? Because logistically, it is a lot to undertake.
Correct.
You
Yeah.
know, it's the reason why most landowners, they buy land and they just rent it back to the existing farmer that's been renting it. It's because logistically, like what do you want them to do? Plant 150 acres of corn themselves? And I mean, they wouldn't even want to go down that street to figure it out.
No, you're spot
But
on. And
the
that's
co-ops and what we need, what we're doing is people who are, hopefully guiding and leading people into land ownership and what they do with the land is you develop these logistical entities that help people accomplish the goals that best suit the land, which a co-op would serve, because you could have multiple entities that serve it, and with the idea that people are financially achieving what they need to achieve, and then also environmentally it's good. But that's the biggest issue. I mean, literally the biggest issue why people do not do the things that they should do to the land is logistics, and just being able to, number one, know how, and number two, like where and why.
no, you're spot on. I mean, that's what I see all the time. And a lot of it, I think, in the co-op solves this problem too. It's that sense of community, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's a big issue with the efficiencies of everything that we do these days, because there's not that sense of community. So instead of having a sense of community where people are working together for a shared goal, you have corporations that are basically just telling everyone, or controlling how everyone does everything, because of the purchasing, the consumer versus the producer side of things, right? They're producing this, and the consumer wants this, or they think they want that because their marketing tells them that they want that, instead of having a community of people that are like, we need to accomplish this goal, and we can do that by working together, just like this, right? It's like, well, man, if I drive from here to there with a truckload of these trees, I'm going to pay in fuel, and I'm not going to make up for what I'm hauling there. But if I take a train and load every car full of these during a certain time of the year, then it pays for itself, and then some, and then everyone gets more of a return back, right? But you're spot on. I mean, it does come down to logistics and putting those plans together. And that's why I wish more people would, honestly, more people would just call me before they have a logger come out, so they can have a plan to go. I mean, the ones that call me after they have it logged, it's a little bit disappointing a lot of times when you come through and like, man, you should have left that,
Yeah.
or you shouldn't have done that, or whatever it might be. And you can't take that back. Again, they just wiped out a couple 100-year-old tree, or having loggers on your property in the middle of the summertime, and the logger tells you it's not a big deal, but then they just scar the land so bad in some situations. So there's a
Yeah.
lot to it.
Well, that's why logging is so intriguing to me. Like, I get why people don't do it a lot. Well, I think there's a lot of people that do it and they're just so busy. But it is very seasonal. Gosh, if someone could just step up and do a good job at logging in the winter when they should, in a regenerative slash
Well,
responsible way,
it's a tough gig. You
I'd have a
think
lot of
about it.
business for them.
Well, it's just tough. I've got three or four projects, three projects right now underway, dealing with different loggers. And it's tough because you're at the mercy of the weather, and this
Yeah.
winter, when it was so warm and so wet, and these guys are pretty good loggers. I mean, they seem very responsible and acknowledge the potential damage of maneuvering on a property when it's soft, right? Not to mention that they know they're going to get their equipment stuck or slide around and break stuff and whatnot too. But yeah, it's tough when you're at the mercy of the weather and you have such a short window to get things done. And and I'm not saying you can't log during the summertime either, but it does make me extremely nervous when it's a property with a lot of oaks and then they say they're going to come in and do a select cut during June.
Well,
That's a big no-no.
that's pretty much illegal, isn't it?
Well, it's illegal to cut the oaks around that time, I believe. But if they're in there trying to pull other trees out and are just supposedly carefully working around the oak trees, it's a little iffy. But again, there's a lot of loggers out there. There's a lot of people in general out there that aren't qualified to do the jobs that they're labeled
You
as.
need someone who's really good at logging that has trades that is popular during like concrete.
Yeah.
You need a concrete guy to
No,
go
I
buy
need
a skidder and start logging.
what I need is a guy that has a biology background or is interested in learning and stuff like that and can work with me to be a consultant and a project manager and take some of this load off my plate, and then could be a logger that could be my go-to guy. Because honestly, if I could find a few guys like that have those credentials, I mean, if you have a logger
Oh,
that
that's
understands all of it, the bigger picture, like, man, that's the holy grail right there.
yeah.
I mean, you think about that. It's almost like being a farmer and understanding all of it. Anyway, you mentioned I wanted to ask you about this, but you mentioned that your chickens never slowed down laying eggs this winter. They slowed
No, no,
down,
they did. They
but they
did.
didn't, but
They started
not.
picking up again.
Okay. Yeah, so that's good. The reason I brought it up is have you heard about this whole conspiracy with egg production, backyard flocks and whatnot?
Yes. Which part
What's
of
your
it? Because I've heard a lot of different ones.
Well, the fact or the I guess the one that I'm talking about specifically is this particular feed company that people feeding this feed, their chickens effectively stopped laying eggs last September and have up until I guess still a lot of them are still now not laying eggs, but a lot of these people have had egg production commence now that they switched to a different
Well, I
feed.
actually watched a video this morning of this lady who said that she started feeding them goat feed and they started laying. And that was exactly what you described. Weirdly enough, that was sent to me today, though. I had
Interesting.
not heard about that at all for that. I had heard about the narrative that was being pushed that eggs were causing blood clots.
Oh yeah, that's a whole whole nother bunch of BS. I mean, that's
But
the funny thing.
I buy my feed from a local co-op, like grain
Yeah.
mill place. So I don't think they would be affected by that, but it's like, what is it, like a name brand that's probably in like Ace Hardware and stuff?
Tractor Supply.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was like Producer's Pride. Well, actually, so I saw one clip, and that's about as far as I went. I didn't, because it's not really affecting me right now, and none of it surprises me, and I don't need to do
Well,
research on it
you're
anymore.
staying positive.
Yes, I'm staying positive, but it's very plausible what these people are talking about. So basically, you have this one feed producing company that they have a whole variety of different lines of feed that they sell or do business under, and a lot of these people were complaining. The Producer's Pride, I think, was the main one that people were complaining about. But as it turns out, whether this is related or not, as it turns out, this particular feed company, around the same time that all these people's chickens stopped laying eggs, they merged, or some sort of collaboration business wise. I think they merged or bought up this other big company that just so happens to be an egg producing company. Right. So there's this big push. I don't remember what the name of that company is. I'm not going to throw a bunch of names out there because I haven't dug deep enough to be a source of clear info, but this is how it goes, right? It's like it's the company that supplies eggs to some of the bigger grocers like Walmart and other grocers like that. But yeah, they partnered up or bought this company and are making a big marketing push for not pastured, cage-free eggs. That's all started, all the finances, when these people are talking about how they looked at these tax records and the finances and whatnot, like show like this financial merger taking place in September of last year, coincidentally the same time that most of these people had issues with their chickens not laying eggs. So is it plausible that there's a conspiracy that a giant corporation who both provides food for chickens and eggs to customers would do something to the feed to make all the people that aren't buying eggs have to buy eggs? Is that
Yes.
plausible?
Yeah,
Would a big
absolutely.
corporation in this country do something like that? Yeah,
Yeah,
they would.
especially with the food industry. I mean, they're willing to do anything.
Yes,
And that
exactly.
makes a lot of sense because there's been a lot of funny business going on with the egg world.
Well, lots of it. I mean, now what? Just yesterday, another egg facility burnt down and killed a whole bunch of birds, and how many eggs were ruined and gone there. And
I
then
promise you, like, I think about it daily. I know my biggest obstacle with the things that I am trying to accomplish, the same things you are trying to accomplish, whether it's homesteading or giving people an alternative way to live their life where they are not dependent on normal things that kind of are controlled by the government, um, will be legal stuff, guaranteed. If not things like this, where they
yeah,
will make it weirdly illegal for you to have 10 chickens in your backyard or
well,
something.
and that's what I think they're doing right now. They killed 52 million birds in this country last year due to the avian flu, which most of the people involved in it can't confirm that it was actually a real thing, right? Uh, Maybe did they find positives? Yes. Was it some weird strains, something that's moving, at a different rate? I mean, there's been people complaining about wild waterfowl, being found, a lot of them actually with avian flu. So that's a very real thing, but killing 52 million birds in 1 year due to it, I'm sure that there was a lot of overreach happening there. And then, yeah, on top of that, now you have all this stuff going on. You've got our buddy Bill Gates back tweeting about how eggs are so unhealthy for you, and he's got the solution because they're going to come out with a Beyond Egg, which has all the same great benefits of an egg, but no cholesterol. It's like, come on, man, just let it go. Just let it go. But yeah,
Of
and then
course,
you're
yeah, I
talking,
saw that today too, where he's coming out with that product, and all these things just magically have started happening.
yeah, yep. And then you were talking about the articles that were released claiming that eggs are causing blood clots and stuff. It's like, man, I eat like 4 eggs a day usually. I mean, less now because chickens they just naturally lay a little bit less in the wintertime, but it's nothing for me to eat a 3 or 4 egg sandwich just for breakfast in the morning, and then sometimes at night we'll make an omelet or something. You know what I mean? It's like they're delicious. I love
I eat
them.
them
And
with
then,
everything. Like if I cook a steak, like a beautiful steak dinner, I will put 3 eggs on
oh
it.
yeah, they're so good, and they're so good for you. So don't let anyone fill you full of that garbage that they're not good for you. I mean, that's the crazy thing, is how all this information's finally coming out from, you know, non-biased sources or independent medical researchers and stuff about the whole food system, but also, the food pyramid and the actual nutrients and stuff that people benefit from versus what we've been told for the last couple of decades. And it all makes sense. I mean, all you have to do is look back at human history and see how we've evolved. We didn't evolve eating over processed foods and stuff like that. We evolved relying on animals, right? It's like if you live in a northern climate, which most of our ancestors came from a climate like that, right? If you live in that environment, you're not going to be growing plants year round. It's not like you're shipping up plants from the southern half of the continent that you're on when it's winter in the northern half. So you rely entirely on animals throughout that time of the year. So, and I look at my dad, man, he would fry bacon every morning. I'm sure he still does. He would fry a few strips of bacon every morning, and then he'd fry a couple eggs in that bacon and eat it. And he never had cholesterol or health issues related to that at all.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I do.
I mean, I don't fry my eggs in bacon grease, but I'm not against that. I just don't have enough bacon. You got any extra bacon you want to hand
Soon,
over? I'll take some.
soon. I think here's yeah, in July. Here's the greatest thing about, well, the egg industry is afraid because they should be, because there's no need for them really. Every single, even just, man, like if every other household had 3 chickens, number one, it would feed you and your neighbor. Number two, it would take care of their food waste.
Yeah.
I mean, they are literally the like best animal. It is like that is the easiest solution for people to be involved with this in some way, shape, or form. I really believe, like, if you do not have chickens and you have more than, if you just have a yard, I mean, that should be illegal.
I
I
100%
mean, it
agree.
should be illegal for you not to have chickens. That's why I don't get big on selling eggs, because I don't really care. And also, I think everyone else should just get chickens.
I 100% agree. I mean, that's all of our food
They're
waste,
so easy, man.
especially if you have kids, man, you could for sure, a normal family could for sure sustain 3 or 4 chickens on just the household food waste that they have with
And you
very,
talked
very
about
little
it.
supplement feeding. Yeah.
Like, you buy two things that are, buy one thing that's really important, the automatic door. That
Yep.
takes away pretty much all chores. And
And
then just get a big enough feed and water thing for them that you only do things once a week with them. If
and
you and it,
and if you only have 3 or 4, then you can probably afford Kevlar jackets for your chickens so hawks don't kill
well, or get a dog like mine
them.
who
Who stares at the
chases.
sky. Yeah.
Oh, dude, he chases. I mean, we've never had a, as far as I know, we've never had a daytime murder of a chicken, which is pretty rare when you have chickens for this long. Um, because every bird in this area, number one, I don't have the cover and I don't have the woods around my place like you do. I think that's a big thing. But
Yeah.
also, my dog will chase any bird that's 100 feet in the air and bark at it.
And airplanes. I've seen that also.
You saw him chase
Both.
an airplane?
I saw him very interested in barking at an airplane that
Yeah.
day.
Well, it's just, it's so that's, I mean, that is the biggest thing. Like, they are worthless against any type of
Yeah, but
predator.
that's the
But
thing. I mean, that is the number one thing with keeping chickens is to ensure that they're safe from predators. Beyond that,
yeah,
they're pretty easy to keep. Then, like you said, like you can have a self feeder and a self water that you only during the summertime. I have a 55-gallon barrel that I fill with rainwater for my chickens, and I rarely ever fill it, honestly. So I just make sure that everything stays clean for them, and that's one of the reasons why I notice them eating snow is because I'll switch them from that 55-gallon barrel that has drinking cups on it to a, a heated water that has nipple waters on it, and they don't like the nipples as much as they like those drinking cups. So there's usually like a 1 week period where they hardly drink out of that nipple water, but they'll eat snow instead.
yeah.
So, but no, chickens are, man, I say it all the time. I mean, if anyone follows me on social media, that's probably 20% of my posts are something about chickens and recycling. And where I'm at now is probably like every other American, I get a lot of cardboard boxes in the mail or packaging material or, just a lot of like paperwork type stuff from running a business. And now anything that doesn't have like plastic coatings on it, or I peel the labels off as much as I can, I run it through a paper shredder, and that's what I use to bed my coop. So I've got
Oh yeah.
cardboard
I have not.
shavings that are
I don't do
embedded in my
that.
coop.
That's pretty smart.
Well, then it just turns into compost, right? Between table
Yeah.
scraps and that, I mean, that's the thing is everyone in town could have chickens. And I'm very curious. So, anyone who's listening to this, if you're in that situation where you're in town, you're contemplating getting chickens, I'm curious as to what is stopping you from getting those chickens, because I'm here to help. Like, I mean, that's part of my
Thinking that
business is
it's
helping people develop.
thinking that it's gonna be a lot of work, I think.
Well, I think that's true. I think a lot of it's just like apprehension to get started and knowing what you need and what you don't need.
Yeah.
But I've set up a few people with chicken coops and systems like that already. And that kind of promoted that other side of my business, that homestead habitat side of things, where initially I was just going into these smaller properties, these smaller or these homeowners with smaller properties, and helping them get rid of, whatever aesthetic invasive shrub was planted in their yard by a landscaping company, or they bought from a big box store, getting rid of those things first and foremost, and planting beneficial native shrubs again for those beneficial native insects, the moths and butterflies and all sorts of stuff like that. But then it was like, hey, you want to start a garden? Yeah, I want to do a garden. Okay. If you're gonna have a garden, you absolutely should have chickens. And even if you don't
Dude,
have a garden, you should have chickens.
It's such an amazing, yes. I mean, it's just those two things are so easy to do.
Well, think of this. You have the potential with how people currently operate, the mindset of how much food we waste in general. And again, this era of having everything shipped to our house all the time. If you grind up the cardboard for bedding, utilize that, so you're not buying wood chips or shavings or anything. You're just taking, essentially the same type of carbon in a different form and breaking it down, using it as bedding, and then you're feeding them all of your food waste. You're still gonna have to supplement them with a little bit of grain, but not very much. In fact, you might not have to supplement with much at all if you're feeding them enough food waste. I mean, those things, they'll eat everything other than onions. They don't like onions, but raw meat, they love raw meat. In fact, I feed mine a lot of raw meat scraps during the wintertime to help them, increase egg production and operate a little bit higher temperature when it's cold. But you feed them all those table scraps, you use that bedding in there, and then when spring rolls around, you have phenomenal composted fertilizer that you can mix in your garden. Or you
Yeah,
put it in a
it's
pile and let it break down even more for a little bit longer. You can mix in your grass shavings, your those long clippings and your leaves and stuff like that. All that stuff in town. You can handle all that stuff in town and reduce all that food waste and all that stuff going to landfills and utilize it in your garden to grow your own food, or a percentage of your own food. That's the thing with chickens, man. It's like they're very easy to keep if you have a good setup. They take your waste and convert it into nutrient dense eggs, protein rich, highly nutritious, delicious eggs. And the byproduct of that is very bioavailable fertilizer for your plants, right? Nitrogen rich fertilizer to feed your plants. And it doesn't have to be a garden, could be a fruit tree in your yard, could even just be other trees and shrubs in your yard, could be your lawn. Honestly, that's the best thing for your lawn, as opposed to putting all these synthetic fertilizers and crap in your lawn that are ultimately destroying all of our groundwater systems and everything that goes along with that. So I really think chickens are a gateway for people to be significantly more connected with not just their food, but their environment. I mean, I know for me it was, because it's like once you start giving them lawn clippings, or like bagging your lawn clippings and stuff and putting them in there, you're automatically, you should anyways, automatically think like, wow, I shouldn't be spraying my lawn with chemicals if I'm giving that to my chickens. Those chickens are feeding on that, picking through it, and then laying eggs for my family, right?
well, they're just they take care of chickens and pigs are kind of the same thing, where they take your waste that we have. I think it's the main importance of grain, honestly. Like if corn was only grown to feed chickens and pigs, it would be a lot better situation. Because chickens
Yeah.
and pigs, I could see that being a net positive, because they will take care of literally all of your food waste. So if you make the argument that food waste is a problem, then I would make the argument that everyone should have, at the bare minimum, chickens, and pigs would really take care of like a neighborhood's food waste.
Which is, again, that sense of community that we lack. I mean, if I think about that all the time. If there was a neighborhood farm, so to speak, or disposal center where you could take the organic products, organic waste products from your house, and by organic I mean, things that are compostable or break down or can be recycled nutrient wise, cardboard boxes, paper, stuff like that. shredded up for bedding, stuff like that, and then obviously all your food waste. Yeah, if you could take all that stuff there and then get some sort of food type dividend out of it at the end of the year or throughout the year, I mean, that would be a significantly more productive system. And I see that as being the future down the road once people pull their head out of their ass and stop thinking that we can mechanize and 3D print our meat and all that stuff like that. But no, I think chickens are obviously very, very valuable. Very valuable. Sadly, I have too many. I still have 3 roosters right now because I tried to hatch my next generation for my flock this year instead of just buying poults. And
Didn't
that
work
was
well.
no, because all but one of the eggs that hatched was a rooster. So I ended up with one hen and all roosters. And I had a couple that I was pretty sure were roosters, but I thought maybe were hens. They just looked a little bit different. So when I butchered all the roosters for soup meat this summer, then I left a couple of them, and sure enough, when they matured, they were, without a shadow of a doubt, they were roosters. And now I have 3 roosters in my chicken coop. But I don't know. They're either going to end up in a soup pot or as coyote food or hawk food. I'll just sacrifice
Yeah,
them
I have
to.
2 right now. I don't think there's anything. Well, I guess because of the kind of alert system they are, I think they'd be positive. You think one is responsible for helping keep the hawks away?
Well, I know I've got a mature rooster that is 3 years old. His name's Rusty, if you're wondering. Rusty the rooster. He's a boss. I mean, he's got big spurs, and he's definitely the one that keeps most of the hens in check. And then the other 2 are more beta roosters that they just kind of do their thing, but they still will take a hen and get a little bit aggressive with her from time to time. Let's just leave it at that. So I don't know, but I
Dude,
think
I had the craziest National Geographic scene play out in my garden one day. I was lucky enough to be standing about, 50 yards away, and I watched from a distance. So I have a white rooster and a red rooster. The red rooster, they both came at the same time. They came as part of the last meat bird group that we had. And the red one is obviously the dominant one and beats up the white one. While the white one was on top of a hen in the middle of the garden, probably like 25, 30 yards away from the chicken coop. And the red one like came out of the coop, looked over to the left, saw it happening, took off on a dead sprint, flying kicks the white one while it's still on top of the hen, and within like a second hops right back on the hen and like continues where the white one just
uh
was.
might as well take advantage of the opportunity, I guess, huh? Yeah, they don't.
Yeah, they're crazy, man.
Yeah, they are. I mean, they're wild animals, but I think they're cool. Those big old roosters when they make that little roar. It's just like
I
a
love the
T-Rex.
sounds.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think I've heard that.
my kid's big into dinosaurs and stuff right now, so he's watching these dinosaur shows on like Nat Geo type channels and whatnot. And when you have those like guttural roars that they make, and then you hear one of those chickens make that
Yep.
same noise, like it's exactly the same noise. It's just like that smaller scale. It's like the change in pitch from a normal sized human being to like a midget. But now you have like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
dinosaur to a chicken. But no, I they're just awesome to have around. I mean, they can be a real pain in the ass if you let them get into the wrong spots. I mean, they tear up my garden beds at the wrong time of the year and rake all the mulch out of them. And because half of my property's on a hillside, it doesn't take them very long to scratch all the mulch out of a garden bed down onto the driveway. But then you just learn, keep them out of those areas. And I actually just run an electric netted fence now and just give them certain areas every day and move them around. And actually this summer, my plan is to put them in a mobile coop and just move them around in a mobile coop, because my chicken coop, typically half of it gets converted to a brood house in the spring and the summer for the meat birds. I start them in there and then finish them in a chicken tractor out on the food plot. So I need that extra space anyways, and then I can move those chickens around and let them get killed by more hawks and such. We're gonna go ahead and wrap this up with some closing thoughts. Again, my philosophy is that if you want to save the world, you have to start at home. And I want to try to give everyone a weekly tip every week, just kind of some of the things that I'm doing to improve myself, improve my family, improve my community, and so on. Uh, and the piece of advice, last week we talked about your purchasing power and making a shift to healthier foods and just being a smarter consumer to invest in companies that are that have the health of the planet and the health of you as an individual in their best interest. And this week, what I want to talk about is just the concept of starting small, right? With all these things we talked about, whether it is chickens or anything, anything that we can do to improve, again, ourselves, our family, our environment. Just start small. You know, one of the things you can do is look at your habits that you already currently have and how those habits ripple and affect the people around you and everything in your daily life. You can adjust those habits and buy certain things that seem eco-friendly, but maybe they're not actually improving things that much. Maybe it makes you feel good because you're buying it. One of those examples I see a lot of times is the buying like a eco-friendly coffee from a brand or something like that, which is good, obviously. But you know, beyond that, an even smaller thing is just looking at, again, this is just an example, but look at how you're brewing your coffee. Because if you're brewing your coffee in a way that is requiring a whole bunch of water usage for one tiny little cup of coffee, or other resources, filters, all this stuff, whatever it might be, like, can you cut that down? Is there a way that you can improve that? And that's true, I think, with every aspect in our life. Like, look at how you're doing things and can you be more efficient on a resource side of things. Can you consume less energy? Can you waste less water? Can you invest, or obviously save money, but can you invest in those companies that also have that same mindset? But at the end of the day, just look around and be honest with yourself and be critical and just try to strive to do the right thing. Let's start small, and from there it kind of snowballs. And like on the self sustainability, uh, you know, food security side of things, chickens, I think, are an incredibly good way to start small. And I understand that might not seem like a small feat to a lot of people, but maybe start small by talking to someone who has chickens and get to know them, or just ask questions and go from there. If more people had chickens, we would not have a need for the egg industry. If maybe you really like chickens and like to keep them, and maybe you have extra space and your neighbors don't. I mean, that's kind of our situation in our neighborhood. Is everyone has equal amount of space in our neighborhood, but a lot of them don't want to deal with the chickens, so we just raise extra chickens, and when we have extra eggs, we sell them to the neighbors. It covers a lot of our costs. You're not going to make money, get rich on eggs unless you're at a high production level. But if you can cover some of your feed costs or most of your feed costs with the excess eggs that you're producing from your flock, that's a win-win. And you can get to the point too where your neighbors bring their food waste to you. I do that. They'll bring food waste to me from time to time, and yard waste and stuff like that. And again, that ripple effect where I just tell them straight up, I'll take your yard waste and turn it into compost for you, and next spring you can come back and get it for your garden. But the stipulation there is that you cannot spray your lawn. And most of them, that's really not a hard choice. They just like, okay, done spraying the lawn. All right, then we'll take it, and goes from there. So again, ripple effect, start small and just do the right thing. I mean, we all have to be more critical of ourselves and the things that we're doing, instead of just being stuck in this state of comfort. We're used to doing things this way, when we know now at this point that a lot of things we're doing are not sustainable long term. Again, is it sustainable for this generation? Maybe, but what we hand the next generation isn't exactly an advantage by doing the things that we're doing the way that we're currently doing them. So that's it, I guess.
All right. Yeah. We will see you next week then.
All right, Taylor. Take care. Stay warm out there.
You too, man. See ya.
Later.